Why, hello, my loves, and welcome back to Spook Manor. Are you here for a classic tale of good and evil? Then join me as we follow an aspiring young journalist in search of an angelic vision. It is a warm, late August day in Iowa where our story begins. Bernadette Sanders sits on a park bench with a laptop in hand as she searches incessantly for a job. Having just graduated from the University of Iowa, she settled down in Council Bluffs with the love of her life, Barry, to start her career and maybe even a family. But the latter was far from her mind as she dreamed of becoming a famous reporter and author. She was surprised how difficult it was to find work. She clearly wasn't the only one seeking to advance her career, as most companies she applied for already had reliable journalists on hand. But when she got a response from a small travel website requesting a spooky tale for the town's upcoming Halloween events, she was more than excited to take the job. She didn't actually believe in the paranormal, but was honored to delve into the rich history of the local area. The slightest bit of research brought her to Fairview Cemetery, where the Black Angel demanded attention. The history being unique and the lore tantalizing, she quickly began her writings about the dark messenger of the divine. The bronze statue towers over the beautiful grounds with watchful eyes over the tombs of people who chose this picturesque location as their final resting place, she wrote. Then, after taking a deep swig of her coffee, she continued on. Having turned black from the elements, she holds her majestic wings in a welcoming manner and a bowl of flowing fountain water in her arm. This was meant to be the memorial for a prestigious woman in the town's past, a Miss Ruth Ann Dodge. Her husband, Union Civil War General Grenville Dodge, is often referred to as the greatest railroad builder in American history. His career made Council Bluffs famous, and it is believed this led to the founding of Omaha. It is here where he settled, lived, loved, and passed away at the age of 85 on January 3rd, 1916, and his beloved wife Ruth Ann was soon to follow. Suffering horribly from cancer, Miss Ruth Ann waited for death with fearful anticipation. But one night, she had a vision. She stood alone by the water's rocky edge and watched as a boat approached from the surrounding mist. An angel stood tall upon the floating vessel and offered her a drink from the water of life, which the angel held in a large bowl. The divine messenger told her, "I bring both a promise and a blessing," although some say she offered immortality. Feeling undeserving, Miss Ruth Ann refused. The angel returned to her a second time with the same vision and offerings. Again, she graciously refused. But when the third vision came, Ruth Ann chose to consume the sacred drink and had suddenly become filled with an overwhelming sense of peace. She knew that her time had come, and she was ready to move on to heaven where her dear husband waited patiently for her. She told her two beloved daughters of her vision, and with tranquility in her soul, she passed away with confidence on September 4th, 1916. It is important to never underestimate the power of grief and money. Ruth Ann's daughters, the Dodge sisters, were now very wealthy from their father's dealings and had high hopes of making a spectacle out of a monument they would build to honor their cherished mother. And what better way to do it than to make her haunting vision a reality? The two sisters hired one of the most infamous sculptors in American history for their memorial. And who could this artist be, you ask? None other than Daniel Chester French, who is known for creating the Lincoln Monument in Washington, D.C., the Minuteman in Concord, Massachusetts, and the Alma Mater at the Columbia University in Manhattan, among many other great works. And what better muse for the angelic statue than the beautiful Audrey Munson, who is often referred to as America's first ever supermodel. Known for her exquisite features and elegance, her spectacular form can be found on gold coins in many historic buildings and structures around the country to this very day. Everything was in place for the grand reveal of the Divine Memorial Fountain in 1920. The Dodge sisters had a large event planned with prestigious guests, including the sculptor himself and the First Lady of the United States, who proudly planned to attend. But tragedy struck, and the historic day never happened. The beloved Audrey Munson had become flooded with bad press. A man who claimed to be in love with her killed his wife, claiming he committed the crime so that he and the supermodel could finally be together. Rumors began to fly that she had somehow been involved with the heinous act, and she fled to Canada with her mother to escape the press. These allegations led to the demise of the supermodel's career, and after an alleged suicide attempt, her mother petitioned a judge to have Audrey institutionalized. At the ripe age of 40, she was committed to St. Lawrence State Hospital for the Insane, where she was treated for depression and schizophrenia for 65 years. She remained there until her death, at the age of 104. The poor press about their muse embarrassed the Dodge family greatly, and with smooth precision they canceled the event, and the dedication never happened. The mysterious visions and tragedy plagued the reputation of the monument, with some claiming the statue had become cursed, and now haunts the cemetery to this very day. Bernadette sat excitedly. She was wrapping up her article for the travel website, filled with pride that she had finished earlier than expected. She loved putting history into words, and was proud to have such a rich subject. But now, she had reached the mythology, lore, and legend of the tale. She openly scoffed to her husband about the childish stories, but this was the job she had been praying for, and she was going to give it her all in hopes of securing future opportunities. Part of the legend told that mystical things happen when you go to the monument at midnight, that flames shoot out from her eyes, or that she comes alive after sundown. It is often claimed that there is an added bit of magic if you visit the site on the anniversary of Miss Ruth Ann Dodge's death. And how ideal that September 4th was only a couple of days away. However, when Bernadette told Barry about her idea to visit the graveyard on that special night, he adamantly opposed. He reminded her that the graveyard had been horribly vandalized in the past, and that restoration and security upgrades, such as motion-activated cameras to catch trespassers, had been ongoing since the 1980s. He agreed to travel with her during the day, but midnight was strictly out of the question. As the night of September 4th arrived, Bernadette slipped away for her secret escapade. With backpack in hand, she parked as close to the Fairview cemetery as possible and walked up to its gates. She trembled slightly as she broke in, knowing full well that she was committing a crime and would be subject to legal action if she were caught. Walking up the path with graves on both sides, she appreciated the fact that there were some dim lights to guide her way. It was very dark despite this, but she crept on with determination to capture the perfect images for her article. Suddenly, there was a snap behind her, and she quickly turned around to see what appeared to be the shadow of a tall man, standing a few feet behind her near a tall grave. He appeared to be minding his own business, and she knew she only had a couple of minutes left until the stroke of midnight. She quickened her pace and tried to ignore the man as she made her way deeper into the graveyard. She was relieved to see that he didn't appear to be following her. Giving her backpack an added lift to balance the weight on her shoulder, she continued on through the darkness. She watched her watch as the time ticked by. A foggy mist had begun to form along the ground and headstones. She began to breathe heavily, and her heart started to race. Her nerves were getting to her, and she tried hard to convince herself that this was still a good idea. Being the bull-headed girl that she is, she pressed on. Slowing to take a look around, she jumped slightly at the sight of the black angel standing before her. She had made it to the fountain, and with only minutes to spare. With excitement pulsing in her veins, Bernadette rushed to get her camera out of her backpack. It was then that she heard a voice speak up behind her. "There's fire in her eyes," the gruff male voice growled. Nearly dropping her camera, Bernadette realized it was the man she had seen earlier. He had been following her, and she was trapped in the cemetery with him. Glancing at the angel, she looked back at the man and asked, "What are you talking about? I don't see any fire." She trailed off as she saw anger pass over his sinister face. "You calling me a liar?" he asked. Pausing for a second and without another word, the man shot forward like a bullet and grabbed Bernadette with great strength. She was small in stature, and there was no way she could realistically fight him off, but that didn't stop her from giving him all that she had. Each blow was worse than the last. He ripped at her shirt and tore at her hair and clothing. He laughed with dark, sadistic amusement as she screamed out for help. He quickly covered her mouth, and tears rolled down her face. She knew she was about to die, or worse. What she needed now was a miracle. As though a great wind or a giant force had scooped them up, the next thing she knew was that they were flying through the air, tossed about like rag dolls in the hands of something very powerful. They hit the ground hard, injuring her head when she landed on the concrete path. The man sat confused for a moment and then looked up at Bernadette. He was enraged, screaming and demanding to know how she did that. When she didn't respond, he then lunged towards her again. She couldn't think of running. She sat frozen and disoriented by the injury. Blood ran down the side of her face, but her vision was clear enough to see what had grabbed them. A massive winged figure flew above them and through the cemetery, circling around their heads. It was then that she realized it was the Black Angel come to life. She couldn't believe her eyes. Was this some sort of a prank? Just as he had grabbed hold of Bernadette's backpack, the dark being swooped down and lifted the man off the ground. She too was then lifted into the air, tangled and hanging by the straps. The man kicked and screamed, causing her to flop about. There was a loud pop. The strap had broken, her shoulder dislocated, and she fell again. This time, landing in the fountain waters with a hard splash. Accidentally gulping in the liquid, she sat up, coughing for air. To her shock, the statue was no longer on the monument. It truly had come alive and was now on the attack. The man continued to scream and beat at the angel with Bernadette's backpack, but the divine creature had too good of a hold on him. Bernadette didn't care about the pack or its contents. All she wanted was to get out of there, and ran with all of her might back to her car, not stopping for even a breath along the way. Crying hysterically, she drove wildly back to the safety of her home. Her husband Barry was angry that she had been so stupid to sneak out by herself, but he could tell by the trauma in her eyes that she had learned her lesson. He took her to the hospital, and they made a police report of the attack. 14 days had passed since the terrifying night, and Bernadette sat waiting to hear something from the police. But it was the morning of the 15th day that she finally got word. There had been a car accident the night before where a man had lost his life, exactly 2 weeks to the day since the attack, and the police informed her that her backpack was in the victim's vehicle. The victim being the very man who had assaulted her, according to the evidence found on the CCTV footage recorded at the cemetery that terrible night. Strangely, though, the incident with the angel never appeared on camera. She stood in silence at the news, reflecting upon the urban legend, which states a horrible tragedy will fall upon you within 2 weeks' time if you stare into the statue's eyes at midnight. Trying to rationalize the situation, she came to one conclusion. The dark angel had stayed true to her promise of a blessing, a gift Bernadette received when she drank the water of life from the fountain upon falling in. With a wild story to tell the world, Bernadette's journalism career had launched, and she too became immortalized in history through her writings. From that moment forward, she had an overwhelming feeling of peace with life, just like Miss Ruth Ann Dodge felt in death. Although this story has a happy ending, you should be warned that this is not the only dark angel that haunts the cemeteries of Iowa. Join me next week for part 2. So tell me, my loves, have you been to the Fairview Cemetery and witnessed the dark angel for yourself? Please comment down below and like and subscribe for more fictional stories that are often of actual urban legends and sometimes have historical reference. See you next week and have a good night.